and energy. Please welcome James and our panel.
Thank you. So I've learned quite a bit this morning already. One is that the bacon is very crisp outside. It's that the Lincoln Memorial had a bird shit problem, and that you all love saying transparency. I was taking a counter earlier, 151 times already since this mic was turned on at 8:30. So what better opportunity than for us to talk about it a little further? Counting. Analyst. So the word transparency can mean quite a bit to our personal lives, whether it be seeing the caloric count on a chicken Caesar salad, or last night at dinner, the seafood pasta, needing to know that the origin of the mussel was from Canada and not the US. To even Uber drivers, we need to know precision of when they're arriving, how many rides have they given over time. Transparency is all throughout our daily lives, and in particular, in the digital space, if you're playing buzzword bingo during a pitch or presentation, if you see we're fully transparent on your bingo card, you're probably going to have that box ticked. So we first sat down together and figured out what is the definition of transparency that we want to use, or what is the three categories that we want to focus on. So the first is transparency in the terms of cost of media. Second use case is transparency in terms of data, the data quality, where the data is coming from. And the third is from a performance standpoint, ad delivery, where are my ads running, how are they doing? So within those three categories, we also figured out that each one of those different elements means something different to you based on your role and responsibility. So the roles and responsibilities that we'll be trying to separate out today is the agency, which all three of us represent, the brand side, but also the vendor, which we're just kind of bringing in all publisher, inventory, data, tech into one. But before we get started, I want Ahmed and Ben to introduce themselves and the roles that they play within their teams.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ahmed Al-Waili. I'm at Active International, and I lead the Programmatic division. I also head all data and insights at Active International.
Hi, I'm Ben Hovaness. I work on the... I'm Ben Hovaness. I work at Omnicom. I sit on the Enterprise Partnerships team, which looks over our activities across the holding company, and I work on marketplace intelligence and innovation.
Great. So the first angle that we want to work through is from an agency-vendor relationship. So what are some challenges that you guys face on a daily basis with your vendor relationships in terms of transparency?
Sure, I can take this one. There are a lot. I think just to give one example of something I've spent a lot of time working on this year is when we work with our verification partners, like the Integral Ad Sciences and the Double Verifies of the world. And I'm not picking on anyone in particular here, so I'm just describing systematic issues that I've run into, just for the record. So something that I talked about when we had our prep call a couple weeks ago was how in some ways these companies replicate the problems of the credit ratings agencies leading up to the financial crisis, where they're certifying that something meets a given standard, and then you're supposed to say, okay, client, well, we talked to this partner and they're verifying that your level of fraud is this, or your level of brand safety is that. But unless you're taking the further step as your client's responsible agent to understand how exactly these firms are arriving at these metrics, you're not really doing your job, and you're just rubber stamping a methodology that you don't really understand. And I think Evan was speaking about this in his presentation earlier.
Yeah, for us, I think it's getting a clear definition of what our vendors are offering. They could say, oh, we have the best data and this and this. The questions that you want to ask is, okay, is it deterministic? Is it probabilistic? Is it, like, where are you getting this data from? What qualifies a person being a sports enthusiast? Is it just them going to ESPN once and now they're all of a sudden a sports enthusiast? I feel like these are the kind of questions that we have to ask our partners, and there's a lot of times where things are oversold in the beginning, kind of, and then once you run the campaign, you're like, well, I thought it was done this way, and they're like, oh yeah, well, I might have kind of oversold it a little bit, but so those are the issues that we deal with on a regular basis, and I feel like holding accountability and just setting upfront metrics from the get-go and understanding where everything is coming from, that's what kind of determines the success for us.
So earlier, Professor Steve had shared the feedback from the survey of one of the areas of that feedback was, don't give me the pitch, I've seen this before, just talk to me straight. So how do you get to that next step of finding out that the sports enthusiast is actually just people that visit ESPN.com, and it's not sports enthusiast as a 3 times a week user of Map My Run?
Again, it's this kind of the same thing I was saying earlier. It's figuring out what their definitions are for finding these people. Are they just using one data point to put this person in a bucket, or are they using different data points from different sources? Like, for example, are they just saying, okay, this person hit 3 sports sites, now they're a sports enthusiast, or are they saying, okay, this person hit 3 sports sites, they went to a Nike store, and they're subscribed to some sports channels. So that's what makes them a sports enthusiast. That's more data that I would trust, rather than just somebody saying, oh yeah, we have all these enthusiasts that are into sports, and then afterwards, when you look at the data, you're seeing a lot of different people converting. And they could be sports enthusiasts, but they just weren't bucketed that way because they haven't visited ESPN in the last 30 days, for example.
Yeah, I think that's all right on. We have a conversation with vendors when they're trying to pitch us on data segments, or when anyone is, and it comes down to their willingness to reveal what is actually going into these segments. What's nice is that recently the IAB has done some work to try to standardize what is disclosed when a data segment's being put together. So they published this spec a couple months ago, at the end of June, I think. It's like an IAB data transparency 1.0 specification. And it hasn't been widely adopted yet, but I think it's headed in the right direction because it includes these things like, is it based on census data or behavioral or website traffic? Is it based on in-app activity? Was there lookalike modeling involved? How frequently is this data being refreshed? Like, am I looking at data that was really great in 2015?
Yeah, and then, so how do you, within your teams, is this on an analyst planner to vet through? Is there a separate team that is the data science validation team? How do you get past that?
So it's both at OMG. So we do handle it centrally. There's a partnerships group that manages these relationships with firms that are trying to sell us data segments. And we do centralized validation. Where it gets tricky is when sales teams at these same firms will then try to do an end run around the process and go to account teams just to maximize their chances of selling. I mean, sellers are going to sell. So that's where there's a governance and monitoring aspect where centrally we look at what data segments are being used across our various DSP seats, and if we spot something that we don't think should be in use, we'll reach out to that team.
Is that similar for Active as well?
Yeah, for the most part. I think what we'll do is we'll analyze the data and we'll look at, is it telling a story? And a lot of times the story that we were planning for the data to tell is not what we see on the post reports, for example. And that's when you really want to question it, because it's like, okay, we know this A, B, and C, but we're seeing F, X, and W. Like, how is that possible? And then once you start getting into the nitty-gritty, I feel like that's when you kind of need some third-party verification to kind of just police the whole thing and make sure that what you're buying is, in fact, what was sold to you.
And is that what you're referring to in terms of the post metrics, is where the ads were run, or audience traits that were exposed versus what was planned against?
Well, I think for us, we are looking more towards the audience base. Where the ads could run, it's very easy to get that information. It's all about the audience for us and where the audience are going and who are the audience, and are we actually reaching the audience that we want to get eyeballs into. The inventory that's run on is just like one tactic that we use, but it's not really something that we focus solely on.
And without revealing all the secrets, how do you police that the data that you're being sold in is truly validated and verified? Is there a penalty that you would like the vendors to pay if they're not fulfilling their obligations? Or what you had said earlier, Ahmed, maybe I got a little ahead of myself on selling how qualified this sports enthusiast is. Like, how do we get to that application of IAB standards to this transparency in planning?
Yeah, so not to anticipate too much of the rest of this panel, but I think the real verification comes in how well are these data segments supporting your KPIs, right? So if you have KPIs that make sense and a data segment is not delivering on them, then it's not really like, what are the unique characteristics of this segment? Like, how special is it? Was it refreshed last week or last month? At the end of the day, you can make a judgment call based on it's not performing. We're turning it off. Sorry.
Definitely. So before we get to that next step, would you leave any data providers in the room or what we have coined as vendors, any tips of such as what Professor Steve shared earlier with the get straight to the point quicker, don't sell me pitches, sell me differentiators. Are those the two main things? Do you have anything else that you would add to a kind of to a vendor suggestion?
My biggest advice is try to use less keywords and buzzwords and just talk to me straight. I remember I was having like a 10-minute conversation with somebody, and they were talking about, AI and this and probabilistic and proprietary and this, and then I didn't even know what they were selling. I just knew all about all the cool stuff that they do. And it was like, I left there, and then I had more questions than I had when I first started. And I feel like just get to the point when you're talking about your product and what is really different that you can offer that nobody else can. Everybody has their own data sets. Everybody has this and this. But what really makes you different? Maybe some case studies. This is what we did, and here's how we performed against X, Y, Z. Some real-life examples, rather than just all the shiny stuff without even telling me, like, you're even a DSP, for example. So that's my base.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think something that drives me crazy is when it takes 10 minutes for me to understand what category of firm I'm even talking to. And it's not because they're so differentiated that they're impossible to categorize. It's that they're trying to signal differentiation by obfuscating what they actually do. And that it's not productive. It just generates ill will. It's like if someone's trying to sell me a suit, and I'm like, so you sell suits? And they're like, really, we're an integrated menswear lifestyle solution. Like, so what are you trying to sell me? And it's not conducive. Just be straightforward about where you fit into the landscape and what you think your value prop is.
I wasn't expecting the integrated men's lifestyle drop, but that was pretty good. So in terms of brands, what type of pressure are you receiving from your clients? What are they, in the panel description, what are they clamoring for?
So brands are nervous, and arguably so. There's so much fraud out there. There's so much fluff. And in a sense, I don't blame them, but at the same time, we have clients that want everything. They want a CTR, CPA, viewability, like they want literally everything, and they want it at the best cost. And it's, at the end of the day, it's setting those expectations with them and telling them, focus on the one goal that really means a lot to you. Is it driving sales? Okay, great, let's drive sales. Is it driving traffic to your site? Great, let's do that. And I try to move them away from metrics like CTR and clicks and that, because there's like, that's so 2014 or 13 or whatever it is. And
your click-through rates aren't 44% anymore?
No. Now they're 30%. Yeah, so it's just kind of just building that trust and really letting them know that, okay, I understand you want everything. It doesn't hurt to have trackers. Like, you don't want to run a campaign that has like 5% viewability, obviously, but at the same time, if it's not hitting 70%, you're not getting your 4.0 CTR, but you're hitting your CPA goals. That's all that matters. You're driving sales, you're driving acquisitions. So you shouldn't look at every single metric and then start tripping out when your CTR is at 0.2%. Oh my God, what happened? Well, now we're optimizing for actual people, not for inventory that has the ad somewhere that lets somebody click on it by accident that's driving a higher click.
Any difference for your brands and clients, or a similar experience?
No, it's a similar experience for us. One thing that I try to work with our clients on is making sure that they don't leap ahead to the conclusion of what the KPI should be. So for example, a client came to us and said, viewability is really, really important to us because we're a large CPG advertiser, we don't measure conversions directly, and we're tired of wasting our money by the millions on ads that no one's seeing. Like, all right, I'm with you so far, let's keep talking. Then the next thing they say is, so we want our viewability to be above 80% by XYZ year. Like, wait, whoa, no, this isn't good. Because if you're a media agent, like we are, we're thinking about it in terms of the client's budget constraints. So it's, all right, well, you don't have a finite number of impressions you're able to buy. You just have a finite amount of money to spend. Let's figure out how to get you the most impressions that fit your criteria. Maybe let's talk about a viewable CPM instead of focusing on percentage levels. And the same argument applies for all kinds of KPIs.
Just to touch on that, viewability is a very kind of funny subject because to Ben's point, it's like, okay, if somebody's not seeing the ad, is it really working? Why are you telling me, oh, it'll perform better, but my viewability will go down? The thing behind that is data. I worked optimizing a campaign. I worked doing strategy. So I've been on all fronts. And I know when you're optimizing a campaign, at that point, you're looking for actual users, people that have intent, people that are coming to the site. And you get a lot of those from view-through conversions. So even though a lot of those conversions that are happening, maybe a lot of them are not being seen. And that's when you sit with your client and you figure out what the true view-through percentage that you should be looking at. You never want to take 100% view-through attribution because that's just not realistic. So you work that out, and then even though the ad's not being seen, it's still giving valuable data to the people that are optimizing it because they know the inventory that people are coming to the site and converting. They know the type of people that are coming to the site and converting. And from that, your lookalike audience is going to start looking a lot better because then they're actually replicating actual people that are converting rather than just metrics and viewability and CTR, because at that point, you're not really targeting people anymore. You're just targeting inventory. So just because the ad is in 1% of being seen and 1% of pixels and whatever the definition is, it doesn't really mean that it's being seen. I could be so interested in the content that it's just there on the side and it's just blurry to me, right? So that's kind of where I'm going with this. Like I had one client where our CPA, first we're optimizing for traffic, and then the client's like, okay, look, I want to start driving conversions. We placed a pixel, and then their viewability went down from 80 to like 50. And then they're like, whoa, what's happening? Like, this is great, because that means now we're actually finding people that are converting. Like, if you look, week over week, your conversions are going up, and over time, obviously, your viewability is going to go back at a constant pace. So that's, again, it's all part of education. It's part of conversations. They have to really understand what's happening behind the scenes rather than just looking at hard metrics.
Do you cringe when viewability comes back as a primary KPI?
I love talking about viewability. As a tortured soul who actually read the whole MRC standards document, I enjoy it in a twisted way. Because, for example, yeah, totally. For example, there's a little-known fact. There's a carve-out in the viewability specifications saying that ads in the newsfeed, a la Facebook or Instagram, might be viewable in less than a second or less than 2 seconds for display and video, respectively. So I don't really cringe about it. If it's a client like the one I mentioned earlier, a CPG advertiser, like if you just got a client that is stuck using proxy KPIs because of basically being a data-poor business just by virtue of what vertical they're in, then you're going to need to use a proxy KPI. And there are worse proxy KPIs to use than a viewable CPM. It's just making sure that the thing we're looking at isn't being implemented in a destructive way, where the client's like, oh, we're at 70% viewability. I want to be at 95 because I'll look great in front of my boss. I'm like, well, no, you won't, because our delivery will fall off a cliff and your costs will explode. So it's more about managing it than it is about rejecting it outright.
So if transparency is being defined as viewability, you both see it as a dead end in terms of planning for a campaign? It's
so overrated. That's my opinion. But it's unnecessary. Like, you have to be able to track it. You shouldn't be so addicted to it and so focused on it where if there's other more important KPIs, give those a chance to succeed while kind of parking your viewability goals. Again, if it's at like 5, 10%, or even 20, 30, yeah, it's a concern. But if it's reasonable and just because it's not hitting your goal, I think it's, yeah, I don't think it's that important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a hygiene factor. It's like you got to look at your different types of ad units because then there are different healthy bands of viewability. The standard viewability on Facebook is not the same as it is on YouTube, is not the same as it is for a banner on the open web, right? So you need to establish like, okay, what is the number below which alarm bells need to start going off? And to your point earlier, like, oh, our CPAs are so low and we're at 1% viewability. Like, probably all you're doing is cookie bombing and you're not actually generating conversions at the margin. So it can be useful to that extent, but it shouldn't be the most important thing.
And Evan from T-Mobile earlier today was mentioning how within his own internal teams, it is a long education process to get its internal folks to stop asking about these proxy secondary metrics. So do you have any tips for other agency folks in the room or brand folks of how you've been able to, does it take 3 years of a client relationship to build that trust that they're not looking at transparency and they just are looking at the bottom line? Like, how do you get to that next level? Is it vertical specific?
Yeah, I think the approach has to be vertical specific because T-Mobile is getting a lot more data on its customers than Joe Auto Company or Susie CPG, right? And so, what you're able to measure determines how you have those conversations. I think the one thing that's a universal truth in terms of educating people and changing the conversation is stressing the importance of incrementality, making sure people understand, like, what does that even mean? And then educating them about the scientific mechanisms by which we can figure out what it is. Whether it's ghost bidding, whether it's match market tests, like there are lots of different tools in our toolbox to help us find out what the actual impact of our ads is. And if you can get all parties aligned on like, what is our source of truth? Like, what do we have the most confidence in? Personally for me, I think randomized controlled trials like those are awesome and probably the strongest signal you can ever get about whether or not ads are working. They have their own limitations in terms of scale and granularity, but as long as you can get everyone aligned on like, what is the highest standard for truth here? Then you can lay out a testing framework and roadmap and KPI framework that aligns with that and makes sense. I think you're in a lot of trouble when you've just got a bunch of people being performatively skeptical, like, oh, we can't really trust that. Oh, who knows anyway? Oh, what does that even mean? And I get where that impulse comes from, but it's actually counterproductive because it precludes the possibility of actually getting to the truth.
So source of truth equals transparency. Well, how did we get off on the wrong foot where we have to now tread water and figure out how to then regain this trust and get past these transparency questions as related to a inventory site list of where all the ads were delivered and viewability metrics that are sourced from nowhere?
So trust is the biggest thing here. I feel like as agency, we have to have our clients trust us, where they don't need us to send them reports that are policing what we do. And on the flip side, we have to build relationships that we're able to trust the people that we're using to execute our campaigns. So that's on us to do the vetting, to ask those tough questions before the campaign starts, and not really just going off of what somebody says, because there's a lot of times what's said is overstated, where you do the vetting, you get case studies, you get some other components that is really justifying or validating what is being sold to you. So there's trust on both sides, with you and the client, and then more importantly, with you and the people that are executing it, that are telling you, this is the data that you're buying, this is where they're being seen. And again, like if I pull a site list, I'm not gonna go there and I'll be like, hey, why is Joe's Auto showing up on top of my sites here? That's because Joe's Auto is generating a 1% CTR, so that's why it's always showing there. Or on the flip side is maybe there's auto intenders that are going there, but Joe's Auto has a 2.2% CTR, but it's generating conversion. So there's a lot of trust and inspecting the data, making sure that what you're getting is what's being sold, but you don't want to police it too much because you have to be able to trust your partners.
Any final comments before we open to questions? Any other MRC excerpts or anything else to add?
That's my one fun bit of MRC spec trivia for today. Sorry, everybody. I agree with all of that. I think, the question of how did we get to this place where there's so little trust is a panel all of its own, and it would be pretty dark. So I'll just say that what we do now is we give clients as much access as they want. Like, we have cases where clients can literally get the log level data out of our DSPs, and we are totally fine with that. Like, if they want to hire data scientists of their own to perform an analysis of what we're doing, we've actually seen that happen. Like, it's totally fine. And so we've seen that helpful in building trust, because clients know that if they want to see at an infinite level of granularity what we're doing, they can. And I think that's kind of like a security blanket where we probably can't be getting away with anything too sinister if they can see everything we're doing.
Great. And Steve or the room, any questions?
Yeah,
for
we
our
have
panel?
questions.
Not everybody at once, please, just one at a time.
Ben, since you mentioned the IAB data transparency 1.0 standard that came out, I'm curious, you said there's sort of limited adoption right now. Who's going to drive that adoption? I mean, ultimately, don't the buyers and the planners have to drive adoption of this by insisting that their vendors use it? So I'm curious what you guys think about the state of the standard and whether and when you're going to be willing to press that. James, too, if you want to answer.
Overall, I think it is on the agencies and the big spenders. I mean, I don't think you're going to get a couple of mom and pop clients driving change. I think it's the 2% of brands that spend 98% of the ad spend are the ones that are going to drive that. And then it's on the end media buyer. If you have within your IO or MSA, whatever that agreement is, that it's abided by clauses blank, 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 then it's working with some of these other verification tools to ensure that that's the case, whether that be from a data commitment or inventory, and assess some penalties. So I think it's those that have the biggest weight, I think, will have the biggest impact on enforcing that.
Well, my question is very direct. Are you guys ready to do this? And if not, why not?
I think we're ready to do whatever our clients want us to do, per se. Like if you look at the history, the first cool thing was ad verification, brand safety. Then it was viewability, and then it was transparency, and then it's AI. So I don't even know if it's needed per se, but it's all to where the industry's moving. If there's enough people that are saying, oh, we want this, then sure enough, it's going to adapt to more and more brands, and then it's just going to become a standard.
At Beeby, Clark+Meyler, we work with this limited number of partners and vendors so that we're not as exposed in terms of scale or variation. So from data, Oracle Data Cloud partners, and try to limit our exposure based on that number of partners that we work with.
Ben, you guys are among the biggest. If you guys move in that direction,
Sure, so
then everybody follows.
The specification is a great starting point. I think the thing that everyone has to bear in mind with it, before we can get too excited, is that it's all self-declared. So we're reliant on the truthfulness of the person making the declaration that the segment contains what they say it contains. And that does not always happen in our industry. So a recent example of this was when auction types started changing in programmatic. And there's an auction type field in the bid request that you can send out. And it is in your financial interest to declare that a first price auction is actually a second price auction because it induces higher bids. And indeed, we did see bad actors doing that. So there's an issue of verification that's tied into the spec. And until that's addressed, I don't think you're going to see the big holding companies pushing it very aggressively.
Okay. Yeah.
Is it on? Hi, Liz Lee, Director of Data Partnerships at Ibotta. Question for you guys, because I know you're talking to clients directly a lot of the time. I know we all in this room are talking about CCPA and privacy, and just while we're on the subject of transparency, specifically as it relates to data, I know that right now a lot of platforms are thinking about this, companies are thinking about this. Like if you want to run on Facebook with data, you basically have to give the liability, you have to take on the liability yourself. There's platforms out there trying to get agencies to take on liability for data. Are clients thinking about this in a bigger way besides just the liability? Like what kind of an impact that CCPA is actually going to have on the data that's out there and the data that's available, and like how that's going to impact their the media that they're running, the cost, the effectiveness of being able to reach those users?
I'm not sure if it's going to be too much of an impact right off the bat. Like, we were briefly talking, and like, if you remember 8 years ago, there was concern about, oh, we're going to lose the cookie data. And then everybody started panicking. Oh my God, no more cookies. We're going to close shop. That didn't really happen, or maybe it did, but not at a big scale that it made such a big impact. So I feel like it's in the same kind of category as this. Like, I'm not sure if this is going to be that big where it's going to require too much attention. And if it does, then that's when I feel like that's when people are going to really start to sit down and talk about it, rather than just mentioning it right now as something to likely prepare for. Once it really becomes a bigger issue, that's when there's going to be solutions and ways to combat it that people are really going to sit down and try to figure it out.
Yeah, I don't think their backs are against the wall yet, where they're forced to have to talk about it and make solutions based on that. Not to say that that's right or wrong, but when you run was running some analyses the other day based on with iOS 12.1 and higher, how much of an impact is that having to revenue? We're seeing numbers being like 5 and 15% is being allocated probably wrong. And that's kind of the best we can do, but as each device is updated to iOS, or maybe Google is switching these other, making their other claims, all of a sudden when that 12 or 15% becomes 25%, then your back's against the wall, and it's, well, we don't know what's working and what's not in terms of controlling the data and making decisions based on that end CPA or that end business metric. And I don't think most clients are, I don't think there's enough captains on the top of the Titanic to see the iceberg far ahead. Everyone's just kind of bunkered away downstairs and working on their own stuff, and maybe that's the wrong way of doing it.
Yeah, all I'll add to all of that, which I agree with, is that until there's more guidance from regulators, it's hard for us and our clients to know how to react.
We're going to have a roundtable that continues this right now. So we'll be eager to hear how all of you define transparency yourselves, as well as the ways in which you implement it. Guys, first of all, Ben's point about the ways in which vendors define themselves using the most obscurantist terms is actually something that we journalists have been onto for a very long time. And in fact, we used to, among ourselves, say, as soon as you see a press release where in the first sentence it says marketing solutions provider instead of actually tells you what they do, that's your key off, that they don't want you to know what they do, or they're preparing to pivot and they just want to leave the field open enough so that they can redefine themselves quickly.
If you can't convince them, confuse them.
Right. James, panel, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me ask.